Hello and welcome to Amit's Tech Sessions. My name is Amit and I'm a software architect. In this session, I'm going to cover the options to deploy and host containers on AWS. So that means if you have a container or many containers, then what container services are available to deploy or host that container or containers on AWS. I will also provide a high-level introduction of those AWS services in this session. So let's start. So before we jump on to the AWS services which are required to deploy the containers, let me clarify why we should choose AWS to deploy the containers. So if you choose AWS to deploy containers, it gives you certain benefits, and those benefits I'm going to describe one by one. So the infrastructure for container services on AWS is easily manageable and it does not take a loads of effort from you. AWS services come with cost efficiency, so you can use pay as you go pricing from AWS services and pay for only what you use. AWS is a reliable cloud provider being used across many enterprises, banks, startups, and many other companies in other industries. So it gives you high reliability. AWS services are secure by design, so whichever container service you use from AWS is going to be secured by design. Additionally, you can also use different AWS security services to strengthen security on those AWS container services. AWS container services come up with different selection criteria of CPU and memory combinations, so you can choose whatever works for your workloads and just pay for that much CPU and memory. And last but very important, that AWS does have options to choose managed services and serverless services to run containers. And we will discuss these managed services and serverless services in few minutes time. So what are the options of choosing container services on AWS? So first of all, you need a registry to store the container images on AWS. AWS provides a service called Elastic Container Registry or ECR. ECR is a fully managed Docker container registry that makes it easy to store, share, and deploy container images. AWS provides a fully managed service called App Runner to run container-based applications. AWS App Runner, it lets you build, deploy, and run web applications and API services without prior infrastructure or container experience. If you do not want a managed service or you want more flexibility or control, then you can choose a container orchestration service from AWS. AWS provides two container orchestration services, Elastic Container Service or ECS and Elastic Kubernetes Service or EKS. ECS is a fully managed container orchestration service that helps you to efficiently deploy, manage, and scale containerized applications. ECS is a native service created by AWS, while EKS, it's a managed Kubernetes service which runs and manages the Kubernetes in AWS Cloud. So EKS takes away all the efforts of managing control plane from you. Now, if we talk about the compute options for these orchestration services, we have two options, EC2 and Fargate. EC2 is a compute service provided by AWS which allows you to create virtual machines in AWS Cloud, whereas Fargate is a serverless compute provided by AWS, which takes away the efforts from you to manage your infrastructure. And now we'll discuss these in a little bit more detail on the upcoming slides. Elastic Container Registry or ECR. When you package your code into a container image is produced. So now for deployment, you need to store the container image somewhere. That is called container registry. If you want to store that container image on AWS, then Amazon Elastic Container Registry or ECR is the option for you. ECR is an AWS managed container image registry service which is secure, scalable, and reliable. It also offers high performance hosting, so you can reliably deploy application images and artifacts anywhere. Amazon ECR supports private repositories with resource-based permissions using AWS IAM. You can use your preferred CLI to push, pull, and manage Docker images, OCI images, and OCI compatible artifacts in ECR. ECR manages the container images and their life cycle, and it allows the customers to secure those images and also secure the access to those images. And once you have your container image on ECR, then you can deploy that container image on the platforms like EKS or ECS, etc. Now let's talk about App Runner. AWS App Runner is a fully managed application service that lets you build, deploy, and run web applications and API services without prior infrastructure or container experience. AWS App Runner builds and deploys web applications automatically, load balances traffic with encryption, scales to meet your traffic needs, and communicates with other AWS applications in a private Amazon VPC. App Runner is primarily designed for people who do not have experience with containers and still want to use containers for their application. So there are 4 key steps to follow in App Runner to deploy your application. The first one is connecting to the source code or the container image. This means you provide either the repository URL of your code base or registry link to this service. The second step is you configure some options for the build settings and service settings. So you select what vCPU you want to allocate to your application, etc. Then you validate all the details and then you create an application on App Runner. And then finally, within seconds or minutes, you get a secure load balanced URL from the service, which can be used to access your running application. Let's talk about ECS. So if you have containers and you need a container orchestration solution, but you don't want to manage the complexity of Kubernetes, then Amazon ECS is for you. ECS is AWS native service for containers management and orchestration. It provides an easy way to build, deploy, and manage the containerized applications at any scale on AWS. So in ECS, you first create a cluster, then you create a task definition, then you create the task using the task definition, and then you create the service. And then finally, that service can then be exposed via the load balancer to make it available to the public internet. So these are the 4 key steps in ECS service. And let's understand some basic concepts on ECS. So in ECS, you have a container that runs as part of ECS task. As we know, container is a standard unit of software which has everything packaged together, which is required for your application to run, such as code, dependencies, configuration, etc. So what is task? Task is a standard unit in ECS which can run one or multiple containers inside that. The best practice is to run one application container inside one task. You can run sidecar container or containers along with that application container inside the same task. Service. So service is an abstraction on top of the tasks. A service contains one or more tasks and then allows you a mechanism to make your application available for the load balancer. EKS. So EKS is a managed Kubernetes service to run Kubernetes in the AWS Cloud. In the cloud, Amazon EKS automatically manages the availability and scalability of the Kubernetes control plane nodes, which are responsible for scheduling containers, managing the application availability, storing the cluster data, and other key tasks. So with Amazon EKS, you can take advantage of all the performance, scale, reliability, and availability of AWS infrastructure, as well as integrations with the AWS networking and security services. So Amazon EKS, it runs the Kubernetes control plane across multiple AWS availability zones to ensure the high availability. And control plane is managed in a separate AWS account, and it's managed by AWS. As a customer, you don't have access to the control plane. EKS allows you to create application node and attach worker nodes to that. If you look at the EKS workflow, so first you provision an EKS cluster. EKS cluster is your logical unit. Then you deploy the nodes which are required for EKS application plane and attach them to your cluster. Then you, as an application, or user connect to the EKS cluster. And then finally, you deploy and run the Kubernetes applications onto that cluster. So let's talk about AWS Fargate. AWS Fargate is compatible with both ECS and EKS. Fargate provides you a serverless compute capability, which is used along with both of these services. With AWS Fargate, the workflow is like you first have a container image, then you define the compute and memory, then you run and manage your applications, and the best thing is then you only pay for the amount of CPU and memory which we use from AWS Fargate service. So in the next sessions, I'll be doing a deep dive on ECS, EKS, and App Runner, and also will come up with some demos of each one of them. Okay, so that's all I have for this video. I hope this was useful. If you would like to connect with me on LinkedIn or Medium, there are QR codes up on the screen. Thank you.